My name is Margaret Wilson, and for most of my life I believed one simple truth: a mother's love has no expiration date. I believed that no matter how old your child becomes, no matter how far they drift, the bond between a mother and her child is unbreakable. I lived by that belief for 63 years. Before we begin, if you enjoy real-life stories about family, boundaries, and inner strength, please like this video and subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach those who need them most. Stay till the end, you may see your own story reflected here. I raised my only son, Ethan, on my own after his father walked out when Ethan was just 8 years old. I worked long shifts as a nurse in a small Ohio hospital, sometimes coming home exhausted, my feet aching, my hands shaking from fatigue, but I never complained. Every extra shift, every missed holiday, every sleepless night felt worth it if it meant Ethan had a better life. And he did. He grew up, went to college, married a woman named Lydia, and started a life of his own. I was proud. Deeply proud. I thought that was the reward of motherhood, watching your child build a future. But somewhere along the way, things changed. The phone calls stopped being conversations. They became requests. Mom, we're short on rent this month. Mom, Lydia needs medical tests. Mom, the car broke down just this once. And every time I said yes, because what kind of mother says no? Weeks would pass with no calls, no messages. I'd tell myself they were busy. Young couples are always busy. Then suddenly my phone would ring and Ethan's voice would return, warm, familiar, and urgent. I kept hoping that one day he'd call just to ask how I was. That day never came. Last spring, I called Ethan on his birthday. Lydia answered. He's busy, she said flatly. I could hear laughter in the background. Please tell him I love him, I said. The line went dead. 2 weeks later, I called again. I hadn't been feeling well, my doctor had scheduled tests, and I was scared. I didn't want money, I didn't want help, I just wanted to hear my son's voice. This time, Ethan answered. What is it now, Mom? He snapped. My heart sank. I just wanted to talk, I said softly. I haven't heard from you I don't have time for this, he cut in. You're always calling. My chest tightened. Ethan, I'm your mother, and then he said the words that changed everything. Don't call me anymore, I'm tired of you and your requests. My requests? I sat there long after the call ended, staring at my phone, the silence louder than any argument. Around me were photos of Ethan as a baby, a graduate, a groom. For the first time in my life, I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. Had I been a mother or just a convenience? I didn't call him again. Not the next day, not the next week. And in that silence, something inside me slowly began to wake up. 8 weeks passed without a single word from my son until one evening my phone rang and his voice on the other end asked for something that would change our relationship forever. 8 weeks, that's how long the silence lasted after Ethan told me not to call him anymore. At first, the quiet felt unbearable. Every morning, I caught myself checking my phone, half expecting a message that never came. I kept it on the kitchen counter while I made tea, the same place it had always been, as if leaving it there might somehow summon his name onto the screen. It didn't. I went to my doctor's appointments alone. Sat in sterile waiting rooms listening to other patients chat about their children driving them home or bringing them soup. When my test results came back, nothing serious, just stress, I smiled politely and walked out with no one to call. That night, I celebrated with a cup of chamomile tea, sitting at my small kitchen table, the chair across from me empty. Something shifted during those weeks. Without Ethan's calls, I realized how much of my life had revolved around waiting. Waiting for him to need something, waiting to feel useful, waiting to feel like a mother again. So I stopped waiting. I joined a book club at the local library. It felt strange at first, sitting in a circle of strangers discussing novels instead of worrying about rent deadlines that weren't even mine. I started volunteering twice a week at an animal shelter, walking older dogs that no one seemed to want. Funny how comforting it was to care for something that didn't ask for money in return. For the first time in years, my life felt quiet in a good way. Then, on a Tuesday evening in July, my phone buzzed. Ethan, my hand hovered over the screen. I could have let it ring, I probably should have. But curiosity and something else I didn't want to name made me answer. Mom, he said quickly, his voice tense. We need your help. No greeting, no apology. We're behind on rent, he continued. The landlord's threatening eviction. Lydia and I need $2,000 by Friday. There it was, not how are you, not I'm sorry, just another demand. I listened quietly, surprised by how calm I felt. I'm sorry, I said evenly. I don't know who you are, I don't have a son. And before he could respond, I hung up. I expected my hands to shake, my heart to race, guilt to crash over me like a wave. None of that happened. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, clarity, sharp and undeniable. The phone rang again almost immediately, then again, then again. I turned it off and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the wall as the weight of what I'd done settled in. Was I cruel, or was I finally honest? I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. What I saw made my stomach drop. Over the past 5 years, I had transferred more than $60,000 to Ethan and Lydia. Rent, medical expenses, car repairs, credit card debt, emergencies that always seemed to happen right after my pension arrived. I scrolled through transaction after transaction, my tea growing cold beside me. I had delayed my retirement. Skipped trips, lived modestly not for myself but for them, and they were still asking for more. I pulled out a notebook and started writing everything down, not just the money but the missed holidays, the canceled visits, the broken wrist I healed from alone, the birthdays I celebrated without a call. When had motherhood turned into obligation? That night I called my closest friend Elaine, a woman I'd worked with at the hospital for over 30 years. I need you to promise not to judge me, I said when she answered. She didn't hesitate. Tell me everything. When I finished, there was a long pause. Margaret, she finally said, you didn't abandon your son. You stopped letting him abandon you. The next morning, we went to the bank together. And that was the day I made a decision that would change everything. The bank visit was only the beginning, because when my son realized the money was gone, his response wasn't regret, it was war. The bank smelled faintly of paper and polished floors. I'd walked into that building dozens of times over the years, but that morning felt different, like I was stepping into unfamiliar territory. I sat across from a young banker named Rachel, her friendly smile faltering slightly as I explained what I needed. I want to remove my son from all my accounts, I said calmly. Checking, savings, everything. She paused. Is everything okay, Mrs. Wilson? It will be, I replied. The process took nearly an hour. New forms, new PIN security notes placed on my accounts. Ethan would receive a notification within a few business days. Until then, the accounts were flagged for unusual activity. As we stood to leave, I added one more thing. I'd like to update my estate planning. Rachel nodded slowly, her eyes soft. Of course. Outside, Elaine squeezed my hand. You did the hardest part, she said, choosing yourself. I wanted to believe her. When I turned my phone back on later that afternoon, the doubt vanished. 48 missed calls, dozens of messages. At first, they were from Ethan. Mom, this isn't funny, we're serious about the eviction. Call me back. Then Lydia joined in, you're being cruel, family doesn't do this. After everything we've been through, my stomach tightened, but I kept reading. The last message stopped me cold. You should be grateful we even kept in touch with you. Ethan wanted to cut you off years ago. I stared at the screen, reading it again and again. There it was. The truth I'd been afraid to admit laid out in black and white. Elaine leaned over my shoulder and inhaled sharply. Margaret, save that. I did. That evening, I contacted a local attorney Elaine recommended, Marissa Grant, who specialized in elder law. I didn't know if I truly needed legal help, but something in my gut told me this wasn't over. Marissa called me back within hours. What you're describing sounds like financial exploitation, she said plainly. It happens more often than people realize, especially with adult children. The words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. She advised me to document everything. Bank statements, messages, call logs. And to be prepared because once the money stops, reactions tend to escalate. She was right. That night, Ethan called again, then past midnight. At 1:12 a.m., a final message came through. We know where you live. We're coming tomorrow to talk. My hands shook for the first time. I forwarded the message to Marissa. Her response was immediate. Do not engage. If they show up and refuse to leave, call the police. The next morning, Ethan and Lydia arrived. I watched them through the window, Ethan pacing, Lydia standing rigidly beside him, arms crossed. Elaine was with me. She'd insisted on staying. The doorbell rang, then pounding. Mom, open the door. I opened it with the chain still latched. "Hello, Ethan," I said evenly. His face was flushed. "What is this? Why are you doing this to us?" "To us," I replied. "I'm protecting myself." Lydia stepped forward, her voice syrupy. "Margaret, let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. We're family." "When was the last time you visited without asking for money?" I asked. Silence. "You gave it willingly," Lydia snapped. "We didn't force you." I read her message aloud, the one admitting they'd only kept in touch for my money, her face drained of color. "You're unbelievable," Ethan shouted. "We're desperate." "So was I said quietly. "When you told me not to call you anymore." The argument spiraled, accusations, threats, guilt, until I said one word. "Attorney." They froze. "You got a lawyer?" Ethan whispered. "Yes." The visit ended quickly after that. As their car pulled away, my legs finally gave out. Elaine caught me before I hit the floor. "You did it," she said softly. I didn't feel victorious. I felt awake. I thought cutting off the money would end the conflict. But instead, my son and his wife made a move I never saw coming, one that threatened my freedom itself. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound in the house felt louder than usual, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock on the wall, the wind brushing against the windows. I kept replaying Ethan's face in my mind, the anger I'd never seen so openly before. It scared me not because he had shouted, but because I could see how far he was willing to go. The next morning, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Wilson," a woman said formally, "this is Adult Protective Services. We've received a report expressing concern about your mental and financial well-being." The room spun. I sat down slowly. "Concern from whom?" She paused. "I'm not permitted to disclose that information, but the report suggests you may be experiencing confusion and are being influenced by outside parties." Outside parties. Elaine, my lawyer, my breath caught in my throat. "I'm perfectly capable of speaking for myself," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The woman explained that an in-person visit would be scheduled within 48 hours to assess my situation. It was routine, she assured me, just a conversation, but it didn't feel routine. When I hung up, my hands were trembling. "They're trying to say you're not competent," Elaine said quietly after I told her. "This is retaliation." I called Marissa immediately. "They filed a report to pressure you," she said, her tone firm. "It's a common tactic. Don't panic, we'll handle this properly." She instructed me to prepare documentation, medical records, bank statements, proof of independent living, and written statements from people who knew me well. She also advised me not to speak with Ethan or Lydia at all. 2 days later, the visit happened. A social worker named Karen arrived just after noon. She was professional, calm, and kind, which helped more than I expected. She asked me questions about my daily routine, my finances, my health, and my relationships. I answered everything honestly. I showed her my medication list, short and unremarkable. My calendar filled with book club meetings and volunteer shifts. My spotless kitchen, organized bills, and carefully labeled folders. Then I showed her the messages, all of them. Karen's expression changed as she read. Not dramatically, but enough. "This is a lot of financial pressure," she said gently. "Have you ever felt afraid to say no?" I swallowed. "Yes, for years." The visit lasted over an hour. When she finally stood to leave, she met my eyes. "Mrs. Wilson, I don't see any indication that you're unable to manage your affairs," she said. "I'll be closing this report." The door closed behind her and I sank onto the couch exhausted. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, a legal notice arrived. Ethan was petitioning for financial guardianship, claiming I was being manipulated and was no longer capable of making sound decisions. I stared at the paper, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. He wasn't just angry anymore, he was trying to take control of my life. Marissa acted quickly. She filed a response, attached medical evaluations, financial records, and a detailed account of Ethan's financial dependence. She also requested a formal court hearing. The weeks leading up to it were the hardest of my life. I felt exposed, judged, like my motherhood was on trial. Friends wrote letters of support. My doctor submitted a statement affirming my mental clarity. Even the director of the animal shelter testified that I was reliable, consistent, and sharp. The day of the hearing, I wore a simple navy dress and held Elaine's hand as we entered the courtroom. Ethan sat across from me, avoiding my eyes. When the judge asked him why he believed guardianship was necessary, His explanation unraveled quickly: vague concerns, emotional language, no evidence. Then Marissa spoke. She laid out the financial history, the transfers, the messages, the timing of the report filed immediately after I cut off funds. The room fell silent. Finally, the judge turned to me. "Mrs. Wilson," he said kindly, "do you feel you need someone else to manage your life or finances?" I met his gaze. "No," I said clearly. "I feel I need protection from those who tried to." The decision was swift. The petition was denied. Not only that, the judge issued a warning against further harassment. As I walked out of the courtroom, the air felt lighter, as if I could finally breathe again. But I knew one truth now more than ever. This battle wasn't just about money. It was about power. Winning in court didn't end the pain, but it did give me something I hadn't felt in years: the freedom to choose what came next. After the court decision, I expected relief to wash over me like a wave. Instead, what came was silence. Not the painful kind I had known before, the kind filled with rejection and unanswered calls, but a new kind. Wide open. Unfamiliar, the kind that forces you to sit with yourself when there's no crisis left to solve. For the first few days, I kept waiting for my phone to buzz, for another demand, another accusation, another threat wrapped in the word family. None came. Marissa advised me to block Ethan and Lydia on every platform. "This isn't punishment," she said gently. "It's protection." So I did. The quiet that followed felt strange, almost uncomfortable. For years, my identity had been tied to reacting, fixing problems, sending money, smoothing over conflicts. Without that role, I didn't quite know who I was supposed to be. One morning, as I stood in front of the mirror brushing my hair, I realized something unsettling. I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. She looked older than I felt, tired in a way sleep couldn't fix, carrying grief that had never been acknowledged. Not grief for a lost child, but for a relationship that never truly existed. Elaine came over that afternoon with groceries I hadn't asked for and soup I didn't need. "You don't have to earn care anymore," she said when I protested. That sentence stayed with me. I began therapy a week later. It felt indulgent at first, talking about my feelings when so many people had real problems. But session by session, I began to understand how deeply guilt had shaped my life. "You were conditioned to believe love required sacrifice," my therapist said. "But sacrifice without respect becomes self-erasure." Self-erasure. I thought about all the times I'd ignored my own needs because being needed felt safer than being loved. Slowly, deliberately, I started reclaiming pieces of myself. I redecorated the spare bedroom, once kept just in case Ethan needed it, into a bright little studio with a reading chair by the window. I framed photos not of milestones I'd missed, but of moments I'd lived. Volunteering at the shelter, laughing with friends, standing proudly outside the courthouse after the hearing. I took a short trip to the coast by myself. The first vacation I'd ever taken without checking my phone every hour. I walked along the shoreline early in the morning, the sand cool beneath my feet, and realized how long it had been since I'd felt present in my own life. One evening, while sorting through old papers, I found a Mother's Day card Ethan had made in elementary school. The letters were crooked, the crayon faded. "You're the best mom in the world," it read. I cried not because I missed him, but because I finally allowed myself to mourn the version of motherhood I had been promised but never received. A few weeks later, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a short note from Ethan. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't accountability, it was careful, polite, distant. He wrote that things had been difficult, that he hoped I was well, and that maybe someday we could talk things through. I read it twice. Then I folded it and placed it in a drawer. Not every message requires a response. That realization felt like freedom. I didn't block the memory of my son, but I stopped letting it control my present. I hosted dinners again. Laughed loudly, made plans without fear of interruption. My life grew fuller not because I gained something new, but because I stopped pouring myself into a place that could never hold me. One night, Elaine asked me a question I hadn't considered. "If Ethan had never asked you for money, would he still be in your life?" I thought about it carefully. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I know this: I can't build my future on that uncertainty." And for the first time, that answer didn't break my heart, it strengthened it. I didn't lose my son, but I found myself. And the lesson I learned is one every parent needs to hear. I used to believe that being a good mother meant never giving up. no matter the cost, no matter the pain, no matter how invisible I became along the way. But standing in my quiet living room one Sunday morning, sunlight spilling through the curtains, I finally understood something that had taken me decades to learn. Love is not measured by how much you endure, it's measured by how much respect exists on both sides. Months passed after I received Ethan's letter. Life settled into a rhythm that felt steady and honest. I woke up without dread. I made plans without fear. I spent money without guilt, knowing it would go toward my well-being instead of someone else's expectations. And slowly, the heaviness I'd carried for years began to lift. I stopped asking myself what I'd done wrong as a mother. Instead, I started asking a different question. Why was I never allowed to be human? I had raised my son with love, protection, and opportunity. I had shown up in every way I knew how. Somewhere along the line, responsibility turned into entitlement, and I was too afraid of losing him to notice. That fear kept me trapped longer than anything else. One afternoon at the animal shelter, an older volunteer named Rose sat beside me while we watched a gray-muzzled dog nap peacefully. "You remind me of myself," she said suddenly. I smiled politely. "Is that a good thing?" she chuckled. "It is now, but it took me a long time to stop confusing loyalty with self-destruction." That sentence stayed with me. I realized how many parents, especially mothers, live with quiet shame, believing that if their children pull away, it must be their fault. That setting boundaries somehow makes them cold or unloving. But boundaries didn't make me heartless. They made me whole. I didn't stop loving Ethan. I stopped abandoning myself, and there is a difference. Occasionally, I still think about him. I wonder if he's learned anything from all this or if he still believes love should come without limits. I hope he finds his way, but I've accepted that his journey is no longer mine to manage. Some lessons can't be taught, they must be lived. On my 64th birthday, Elaine threw me a small dinner party, nothing extravagant, just good food, warm laughter, and people who wanted me there, not because they needed something, but because they enjoyed my company. As I looked around the table, it struck me that this was what family could look like too. Chosen, mutual, safe. Later that night, I wrote a letter not to Ethan, but to myself. I thanked the woman who had survived manipulation disguised as love. I forgave the mother who stayed too long out of fear. And I honored the person I was becoming, someone who finally understood her worth. If you're listening to this story and feel a knot in your chest, if you've been giving endlessly and calling it love, if you're afraid that saying no will make you unlovable, please hear this. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to say enough, and you are allowed to choose yourself even if others don't understand. Love should never require you to disappear. It should never demand your silence, your savings, or your sanity. And it should never punish you for having limits. I didn't lose my son the day I stopped sending money. I lost the illusion that love meant suffering. What I gained was far greater. I gained my voice, my dignity, my life. And that, after everything, is something no one can ever take from me again. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who may need to hear this message today. Your support helps stories like this reach those who feel alone, but don't have to be.